Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. The topic of today's discussion is the man who cured himself with laughter, and the man was Norman Cousins. It's customary to introduce the speaker, but we are skipping that in the interest of time, because in any case, what is said is more important than the person who says it. And whether that person has spoken with some knowledge and therefore had the entitlement to speak on that subject is something that you can judge more from what the person says than from his credentials. So we'll not spend time on that and straight away go to the subject. Just for the sake of completion, my name is Ramesh Bijlani. Okay. Now, the 100-year period, roughly from 1850 to 1950, was a period of spectacular developments in modern medicine. It was during this relatively brief period of about 100 years, from 1850 to 1950, that we discovered the germs that cause disease and also the vaccines which could prevent those infectious diseases and the antibiotics which could be used for treating those infectious diseases caused by these germs. And the result was diseases such as tuberculosis and cholera and so on, which were the major causes of mortality and morbidity, were more or less wiped out. And it was again during this brief period that the vitamins were discovered, and the result was that diseases such as pellagra and beriberi, which used to kill so many, they were wiped out. And again, it was during this brief period that insulin was discovered, which changed the picture of diabetes completely. A person did not have to die of diabetes anymore and could live like any other normal person, a full span of life, and remain active throughout life. Now, all this naturally generated a lot of euphoria, and in fact, it led to a sort of an intoxication of the medical scientists, and they started believing that, well, many diseases have been taken care of, and rest probably will be taken care of as modern medicine develops further, and further, that not only all diseases will be wiped out, but that the approach that will be required will be the approach that has worked in these situations. If you look at all these situations that I talked about, the disease was caused either by the entry of something harmful into the body, like a germ, or a deficiency in the diet, like vitamins, or the deficiency of something produced in the body, like insulin. So all we had to do was that if something has entered the body, then try to eliminate it. And if something is deficient, try to provide it, replace it. So it was a sort of a mathematical proposition, which had worked in all these cases. And therefore, that is what the approach became. And this naturally led to forgetting of two important things. One was the self-healing mechanisms that reside within the body itself. And secondly, the mind-body connection. Because if you give a person insulin, the blood sugar will come down irrespective of what the person is thinking. And if you give the right antibiotic to a person having typhoid, the fever will go within a few days, and that doesn't require the participation of the patient's mind. And therefore, the power of positive thinking, which can be a big aid to self-healing, was completely forgotten. Now, it is against this background that today we are starting a series of sessions, which will be there today and for the next 4 Saturdays, on some of the pioneers who ushered in the era of mind-body medicine. And today we are talking about Norman Cousins. Norman Cousins was a highly educated and intelligent person, a great scholar, and worked for more than 30 years with the Saturday Review, a major journal in the US, and he was, during this 30-year period, the editor-in-chief. And not only that, the type of things that he wrote reflected that he was a nice man, a person who was a great peace lover of peace, and therefore he established a good reputation, not only as a scholar and a good writer, but also as a good person who could be depended upon for his genuine interest in world peace. And it was against this background that in 1964, he was sent by the president of the US as the leader of a delegation to Russia, which was then the USSR. And the mission was that this delegation should work with another delegation, which the USSR will put up, will constitute, and they should try and limit the nuclear arms. So, the strategic nuclear arms limitation talks, which were sort of very important those days because of the Cold War that went on between the US and the USSR. And he was the leader of that delegation for limitation of arms. Now, while he was in the USSR, naturally, there were many sessions. They were sometimes strenuous. There was a lot of paperwork to be done. And particularly on the last day, what happened was that he was supposed to go at the final reception at the end of these talks. And he was very important there, of course, not only as the leader of the delegation, but also as the only person who could act as a good interpreter, knowing both English and Russian. And therefore, naturally, a driver was sent on time to the hotel where he was staying to take him to the venue of the reception. But however, what happened was that the driver drove very fast, but in the wrong direction. And the result was that by the time he reached the reception, after that mistake had been detected and they finally reached the venue of the reception was almost over. And then after that, he had to rush to the airport and he barely made it in time for the flight. The flight was over full and congested. And the result was that after a very strenuous period of about 2 days, and perhaps hardly any sleep during these 2 days, he was back home. A short period after this, he came down with a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disease, which means that the immune system of the body starts working against some of the tissues of the body itself. And this is a painful disease, and it's an incurable disease. And he was told by the doctors that only 1 out of 500 who get this disease recover, the rest die. And we do not have anything really significant to offer. However, we can do something to relieve your pain. So with this understanding, he was admitted to the hospital, and he found that at a certain stage, he was being given as many as 26 tablets of aspirin in a day and 12 tablets of phenylbutazone. So as many as 38 tablets of 2 types of painkillers in a single day. Now, being an educated person, an intelligent person, he started reading about his disease, and he found that the painkillers that he was being given were actually exhausting his adrenal glands, and that the adrenal is a storehouse of vitamin C, and this vitamin C was being driven out of his adrenals by these painkillers, and that adrenal glands are important for the immunity of the body. And Hans Selye's work on the relationship between adrenals and immunity and between emotions and immunity was already there from the 1950s. So, and he read that work, and through some sort of a rough reasoning, putting these facts together, he came to the conclusion that these painkillers were not really doing him any good. They were doing him harm by damaging his adrenals, which are required for the health of the immune system, and the disease is that of the immune system. So you're damaging the very system which is already damaged by the disease, already not working properly because of the disease, and you're damaging that system by using these painkillers. And that the important thing would be to once again restore the health of the adrenal glands by providing some vitamin C so that the vitamin C that has been driven out can be restored. So he had a talk with his doctors and told them, in any case, you have told me that you can't do much for me. I'm prepared to tolerate the pain, so I do not need any painkillers. And if I don't have to take any painkillers, then I might as well get discharged from the hospital. So he got himself discharged, and instead of the hospital, now he got himself admitted to a hotel, which he found was much cheaper and also more comfortable. And in the hotel was also a television set. And what he started doing was he started watching comedies on this. Now, why he did that was because he had read in Hans Selye's work that there's a relationship between stress and the immune system, and therefore he asked himself one simple question, which the doctors had forgotten to ask. As I said, the doctors were completely hypnotized by the spectacular achievements in modern medicine, which does not require the mind-body connection. So he asked himself a simple question, that it is quite possible that the stress that I went through towards the end of my trip to the USSR might have something to do with my disease. And then he asked himself this simple question: if stress can cause the disease, will happiness be able to reverse it? Very simple question, logical. If something has caused a disease, then the opposite of it might be able to cure it. So it was this intention that when he got admitted to the hospital, to make himself laugh, he started watching comedies on this television set. And of course, he wanted to take vitamin C, and he started taking huge amounts of vitamin C. And certain times, he took as much as 25 grams of vitamin C in a day. And with this combination of laughter and vitamin C, he literally cured himself. And of course, being a person with a scientific bent of mind, what he also did was that he made an arrangement for his uh, blood samples to be taken in the hotel. And when these blood samples were taken, on those was done a test called the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, ESR, which is a non-specific test of the severity of a disease. It's not a specific test for this particular disease, but it's a non-specific test which he found was being done routinely in the hospital to monitor whether his disease is getting worse or better. And he arranged for this test to be done by the blood being collected in the hotel. And he found that every episode of laughter brought down the ESR by 5 points. ESR is measured in terms of how many millimeters if the blood is put in a tube, a standardized tube, how many millimeters it comes down every 1 hour. So he found that the rate at which it was coming down came down by 5 millimeters per hour just by an episode of laughter. And this effect was sustained and cumulative, which means that the effect of one bout of laughter did not disappear, did not get reversed by the time he laughed the next time. It remained, and it got added another benefit in terms of bringing this ESR another 5 millimeters per hour down, another 5 units down. So it was a sustained and cumulative effect. Another observation that he made, which was a little subjective, was that 10 minutes of a full-throated laughter gave him 2 hours of pain-free existence. So pain disappeared for 2 hours, and now with our better knowledge in this area, we can say it was possibly happening because of the release of endorphins, the natural pain-relieving substances released by the brain. So it was perhaps because of that 10 minutes of laughter gave him 2 hours completely free from pain. Now, he documented quite a bit of his experiences. He started writing about them because he was a great writer. And the result was that in 1979, he published a book called The Anatomy of an Illness. In the meantime, what happened was that he started writing about these things before even the book came. He had gone to the USSR in 64 and came down with the disease in 64, got himself cured within a few months. And then he started documenting all this through articles that perhaps he was writing for the Saturday Review and other magazines. And he happened to know the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, Franz Ingelfinger, who told him that why doesn't he write for the doctors? He asked him, why don't you contribute an article on this subject for doctors? Because it's mainly the doctors who read the New England Journal of Medicine. So he wrote an article and went down to be in history, perhaps the first non-medical person to be published by the New England Journal of Medicine. And this article that he wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine raised a lot of interest in the country. And then he was being invited frequently to speak to medical students and doctors all over the United States. And one of the places where he was invited was the University of California at Los Angeles School of Medicine. Here he was not only invited to speak, he was in fact invited to join the faculty of that medical college. So the University of California at Los Angeles Medical College invited him to join the faculty. Again, another sort of rare thing, a non-medical person being asked to join the faculty of a very prestigious medical school. But the school was in Los Angeles, the medical school was in Los Angeles, this person, Norman Cousins, had stayed in Connecticut all his life, much of his life, which was quite far away, very far away from there. But then seeing how much benefit it could, uh, of how much benefit it could be to the doctors of the future and therefore humanity as a whole, uh, he decided to move. He decided to move to California and took up this position. Now, he was in this position from 1978 onwards for a period of more than 10 years till he left this world. And he has documented quite a bit of his experiences in the medical school in another book called Head First. I'll not go into much of what those experiences in the medical school were, but talk about two important things. One was that when he was told to talk about these things to medical students, the medical students did not seem very interested. They thought these are soft facts, wishy-washy things. Talk to the patient properly so that the patient feels happier, gets some hope, the patient's fear of disease comes down. So communication skills and things like that, these are soft subjects. The doctors were interested in hard facts. The medical students were interested in hard facts. Some of the medical teachers also started making fun of him. Do you want to produce public relations experts? Do you want to produce doctors who can win popularity contests? What sort of doctors do you want us to produce by teaching all these things to medical students? Now, Norman Cousins got a bright idea. What he did was he sent 1,500 questionnaires. Those days you could not do email, electronic surveys through internet and all that. So through post, he sent 1,500 questionnaires to an affluent neighborhood where lived people who were affluent and also well-educated with good socioeconomic status near Los Angeles. He sent 1,500 questions to one such neighborhood of Los Angeles. And he received back about 1,000 responses. And what was the question put in these questionnaires? People were asked whether they had changed their doctor within the last 5 years or were thinking of changing their doctor now. So within the last 5 years, had they changed their doctor or were they thinking of changing the doctor now? And interestingly, 85% of the people said they had already changed their doctor at least once or were thinking of changing the doctor now. And the reasons why they had changed their doctor was, I left the doctor's office feeling worse than when I entered. I waited outside the doctor's office for 2 hours. And finally, when my turn came and I went in, the doctor got a personal phone call and he went on talking on that instead of talking to me. When I started speaking to the doctor, instead of listening to me, he started writing all the tests that I should undergo. Before I had finished speaking, and instead of listening to me attentively, he was just going on writing the tests that I should undergo. The doctor gave me the diagnosis in a very cold manner. He thought it was just a piece of information to be given. And he didn't really seem to care whether I'll get any better. And one person said that the doctor sent me bad news, for example, that I have cancer, by registered post. Why? Because probably he wanted to have documentary proof that he has informed me in time that I have this serious illness. But then the patient said probably he protected himself in law, but he lost me as a patient. Now, interestingly, you can see that none of the patients, none of these people had changed their doctor because they thought that the doctor is incompetent. The patients, by and large, assume that if the doctor has a degree, then he knows his stuff. So nobody had questioned the competence of the doctor. All these were related to how the doctor behaved, how genuinely the doctor seemed to be concerned with their illness, with their getting better. And these findings were published again in the New England Journal of Medicine in the year 1985. And these findings naturally became known also to the medical school where he was working, the UCLA School of Medicine. And now the medical students were interested in attending his classes because they didn't want to lose their patients when they become doctors. So this was one important thing that he did. The second important thing was that when what he has seen and his appointment at the UCLA School of Medicine, all this led to many people in the UCLA School of Medicine at Los Angeles getting interested in research in this area. They started applying for research grants. He helped them write the projects. And some philanthropists got interested in it. And the result was that a stage came when the UCLA School of Medicine was receiving such a large amount of money from philanthropists for research in this area that the UCLA School of Medicine itself could not use it. They did not have enough of the faculty and enough of research projects to use that money. So what then Norman Cousins did was to offer this money to other medical schools in the United States. So the UCLA School of Medicine, in fact, became a funding agency for stimulating this type of research all over the United States of America. And the result was that in a short period of time, roughly 20 years from about 1980 to 2000, grew an entirely new discipline, which we today call psychoneuroimmunology. Psyche is the mind, neuro the nervous system, immunology the immune system. So the mind can work through the nervous system to affect the immune system, which means that psychological states can have biological, physiological results. When a person is depressed, when a person is going through mental stress, chronic mental stress, the immune system becomes weak. That is what all these studies indicated. If a person is happy, cheerful, and relaxed, the immune system works better. So there's a close connection between the mind and the immune system, and the linkage is the nervous system. And today we know, besides the nervous system, also the endocrine system, of which the adrenals are a part. So through the nervous and the endocrine system, the mind can influence the immune system. Now, this was a very important development because medical scientists then, and to a large extent even now, are interested in hard data, in numerical data, statistically analyzed data, which can show statistically significant results, and so on and so forth. So here was a bridge between the subjective and the objective. The psychological factors are all subjective, but then the results were in terms of immunology, immunological effects, for which can be measured through blood samples. The tests done on these blood samples provide numerical data, and this numerical data can be analyzed statistically and published like any other scientific result. So psychoneuroimmunology became a sort of a bridge between the subjective and the objective, and provided results in a form that were acceptable to scientists, to medical scientists and doctors. And therefore, this was an important sort of milestone. And that is why Norman Cousins is today called the father of psychoneuroimmunology. So that was the story of Norman Cousins, who cured himself literally through a combination of laughter and vitamin C, and eventually went on to become the father of psychoneuroimmunology. And with this, now, instead of starting with a PowerPoint, I'll reverse the sequence and go to a short PowerPoint, which will tell you something more about Norman Cousins. So this is Norman Cousins, 1915 to 1990, lived 75 very fruitful years, the man who cured himself with laughter. In his career, his principal occupation for more than 30 years was as editor-in-chief of the Saturday Review from 1942 to 1974. And his instructions to his staff were that it was not just to appraise literature, but they should try to serve it, nurture it, and safeguard it. Gives you some idea of his bent of mind. And he never fired anyone in more than 30 years that he worked with the Saturday Review, which means he was clear about what he expected from the staff, but at the same time, he was also very compassionate. And he didn't really fire anyone. His policy was to reform and transform rather than punish. And this comes out in one of his best known quotes: "Life is an adventure in forgiveness." The second phase of his career, much shorter in duration, but in one way very significant, because that is what made him a famous man, was as the professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of California at Los Angeles School of Medicine from 1978 to 1990. I was just thinking of what the mother has said about a person having a temporary occupation. And if the person engages in this temporary occupation in the spirit of karma yoga, does a good job of it, then eventually he may find his final calling. So probably all the 30 years plus that he spent with the Saturday Review was his temporary occupation. And he really felt that his inner calling was to do what the UCLA School of Medicine was inviting him for. And that is why he took the trouble of, he felt such a strong urge to take that up that he moved house at that age. So he went on to become the father of psychoneuroimmunology. And these were the two books that I referred to. Anatomy of an Illness, published in 1979, which documented his experiences as a patient of ankylosing spondylitis in the hospital and in the hotel, where he treated himself with laughter and vitamin C. And the second book, Head First, the subtitle is The Biology of Hope and the Healing Power of the Human Spirit. This word hope reminds me of one of the important things that he has said in this book, Head First, that when a patient goes to a doctor, he goes with a combination of fear and hope. Fear of the disease, fear of death, fear of becoming incapacitated by the disease. So all types of fears. And he has the hope that this doctor will give me a treatment which will make me better, which will probably cure me, which will prevent the worst consequences of the disease. So he goes with a combination of fear and hope. And the doctor's job is to reduce the fear and enhance the hope. Because enhancing the hope and reducing the fear are important components which will in turn accentuate, enhance not only the immune system, but the healing, self-healing mechanisms of the body in general. The focus has been on immunology because that is what we understand best, but the healing mechanisms could have other dimensions, which also gradually we are discovering bit by bit, other than the immune system. So the healing system of the body as a whole gets a big boost when it is provided the right conditions to work. And among the right conditions is a combination of hope, optimism, and faith in the self-healing mechanisms of the body, faith in the doctor, faith in the system of medicine for which the person has opted, faith in the treatment that the person is taking. Now, all these things contribute to the activation of these self-healing mechanisms, which in fact are the eventual and ultimate healer. Another interesting book that he wrote long before these books, he has written about 20 books in all. This is a book that he wrote in 1945, soon after the United States dropped those bombs on Japan, and that ended the Second World War, in which two cities of Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were completely devastated. This man was so affected by this that he immediately wrote articles in the Saturday Review where he was working, and then followed it up with this book, Modern Man is Obsolete. And why I put Sri Aurobindo's picture with it, that you can see that there's a great sort of a resonance here. About 25 years before this book came out, Sri Aurobindo had come up with the Arya over a 6-year period from 1914 to 1920 with this very idea that man, as he is constituted now, is neither here nor there, neither an animal nor divine, and that is a very dangerous combination. And that is what makes modern man only perhaps a transitional being. The process of evolution, which is unending, will continue, and the choice before man will be either to perish or collaborate with nature in giving birth to a new type of creature much better than man, who manifests his divinity much better than the present man does. So man as he is constituted now, in any case, is obsolete. That is exactly what Sri Aurobindo had said, and this person came to the same conclusion. Modern man is obsolete. I've done a bit of plastic surgery on this book cover because the image of the book cover that was available on the internet was hardly legible. So that's why all this. But the book was published by him in 1945, Modern Man is Obsolete. And the Wikipedia life sketch of Norman Cousins says that he was a lifetime believer in the power of hope and the realism of optimism. Once again, I put Sri Aurobindo's picture because you can see that resonance once again there. The hope that man will give way to a creature better than man, and therefore the world will become a better place to live in. And this type of optimism based on the evolutionary thrust, change in the human consciousness, and therefore a change in human nature, which in turn will change man from a primarily ego-driven creature to a love-driven creature, so that the affairs of the world will be conducted through that love rather than through the egocentric behavior of man, which is characteristic, which has been the characteristic for a long time. But then just because it has been so, doesn't mean that it will always be so. That is the hope, that is the certitude which Sri Aurobindo has provided. And this is quite in contrast with sometimes, the feeling that one gets that this type of optimism is interesting. It is interesting to keep oneself amused, but it is not realistic. Such things are unlikely to happen. But here is a person who had this conviction that not only hope that the world will become a better place to live in, but he had this optimism coupled with realism. He thought that this optimism is realistic and not just to keep ourselves amused. So this man who cured himself with laughter and vitamin C left this world on the 30th of November 1990 at age 75, 10 years after his first heart attack, and 36 years after the doctors had diagnosed his heart disease, and lived much longer than the doctors had predicted. My gratitude to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them up.
There's one in the chat box. Have you experienced Dr. Kataria Mumbai, world known of today as Laughter Guru?
I've heard of him, but I haven't had the privilege of meeting him. Any other question? Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll end this session. Next week, next Saturday at the same time at 6 p.m., I will be speaking to you on the man who discovered the relaxation response. His name is Herbert Benson, and his research was stimulated by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who had come up with the technique of transcendental meditation. Herbert Benson got interested in studying transcendental meditation, and in that process discovered the relaxation response, which provided another important sort of a foundation for the developments in mind-body medicine. So we'll talk about Herbert Benson next week, next Saturday, same time, 6 p.m. The joining link will remain the same.